Welcome to the Stephen Shiels radio show. I've got Houston Dunleavy on. How are you, Houston?
Well, thank you, Stephen. How's yourself?
Good. Happy New Year to you, Houston. What are you up to
Happy New Year to you.
2021?
Immediately, I'm sort of trying to move into a new place to live. That's probably the biggest thing. Everything else goes on the back burner when you're moving house. But there are several big projects hopefully happening this year, including a lot of recording of work of mine. I've got a project to record all my piano music, a project to record all my music involving flute, and a new work which I'm currently working on, a concerto for euphonium and brass band, which is still on the boiler.
How long does it take for you to prepare these concertos?
It's like how long is a piece of string? It depends on the kind of piece it is, and how complex I want to make it, how much spare time I've got, or how much time I make for it. For example, my first sort of major concerto was way back in the 1990s. I was actually asked to write it in 1995, and I finished it in 1999.
Wow!
And it wasn't that it sat on the back burner for 4 years. I was tinkering at it for all that time. There were other things involved, such as the fact that the soloist changed, and because the first one said I can't play that. The second one said, I can. And so I had to keep tinkering around, and then the date kept changing, and then we kept wanting to do more things with it. And so it took 4 years to get that from the first note to the concert hall. Another one it's a far less of a hall was my Viola Concerto. The first Viola Concerto took relatively no time at all compared to that. But the main problem with that was trying to find people who'd actually perform it, because it was for an interesting ensemble, in that it was a viola and all woodwinds. So it was there's not a lot of wind bands out there that would think about having a guest violist. So the piece, although it took a couple of years to get up, in fact only took 4 to 6 months to write, and then once we got it on the stage and so on, with a couple of little things we could tinker with it after the premiere, which we did. And when it was finally, it was clearly worth it, because when it was finally recorded, it won a Latin Grammy nomination for the recording, and then won an award in South America for Best Classical Composition. And that was all long after the fact of having actually done the piece and put it out there. These other things came up that said, well done, it's a good piece, This one, the Euphonium Concerto, it came up really because of COVID. There was a chance to do something different, and when I happened to be chatting to a friend who's a virtuoso euphonium player, he said, write me one. And so I finished the first movement, and this moving house and things like that tends to stop you from writing music. That and the fact that you have to do other work to try and keep body and soul together. When you're a performing artist, you have to do other things. I've done a lot of online teaching this year, the last 6 to 12 months, and that's kept me in beer and skittles. It's kept the rent going. But at the same time, you're still thinking it's a great deal of work to be done on this piece. It's always in the back of your mind. So, 10 o'clock at night, you might think, oh, I've got an hour before I have to go to bed. I'll put a few bars of this together. And then you look at it next time, you think, oh, what load of rubbish was that? And I shall never do this at 11 o'clock at night again. And it's just the way you are, the way you I tend to work best in the morning. And so if I'm still composing late at night, normally I'd say about 60% of that gets trashed the following day. I hear it again and go, oh no, what was I thinking? I suppose another way of looking at it is you find half a dozen different ways not to write the piece, half a dozen things not to put in there, like Edison, how many pieces of material he used in order to try and get the filament for the bulb, 900 and something. It wasn't until he got to his 1000th and something that he got tungsten. And they said, well, don't you feel like it was a waste of time? I said, no, I found out 987 ways not to do it. So that's kind of like, you have to look at trial and error and experiment that way. And all pieces are, for me, there's an experimental element to all pieces as far as I'm concerned.
When you're writing a concerto, Houston, do you make it as hard as possible, or do you want to make it playable or enjoyable?
The answer is C, both of the above. A concerto does imply the fact that it's a difficult work. I mean that it's a work for somebody who's mastered the instrument. However, I learned from the tuba concerto that there are just some things you just don't push. As a friend of mine who actually finally premiered it said, this piece has everything in it a tuba can do, and far more than many of us want to. It's a big work. It's a big work. The viola concerto, on the other hand, had a lot more focus about what was in it, and I think that created a work where it sounds, and it is difficult, but because I made a study of the instrument more, I don't play viola, but I know plenty of people who do, trying to create a work that sits under the fingers, as musicians say, but still can be difficult and challenging, is where I'm at. I mean, sometimes, getting a player to do something that's out of their training is difficult, even if it's something very simple. It's not just in a concerto, but for example, one of my short string quartet, Absence, asks the players to sing. They play a chord and they stop playing, but they keep singing the note they just played. So it's a kind of strange echo that comes back as a voice. And that freaked out a few players. It really does, because the reason a lot of players become players, instrumentalists, is they don't fancy that they have a good voice, or they don't like singing, but they still want to make music. So there was that element. And then there are others, just simply saying something, making a noise other than with the instrument is difficult. A solo percussion piece that requires the percussionist to make vocal noises. And the first person who I showed it to freaked out, said, no, I can't do this. And it was just, oh, hey, that sort of sound. And that was not in that person's playing vocabulary. Yet that person was a new music specialist. So a lot of it depends on the kind of person. What's difficult for some people is run of the mill for others. And so the concept of difficulty is, in fact, I think, a kind of the goalposts keep moving as to how to define that.
The reason why I brought that up, Houston, because I'm a clarinetist, and we played the Weber clarinet concerto, and it was the Mozart. I always found the Weber was more difficult to play, with a lot of the polyrhythms going on.
And also, that's true, and also the fact that it's in a different key to the Mozart. The Mozart is meant to be played on an A clarinet, so you play it in C major. And also, it was a simpler instrument back in Mozart's day. By the time Weber came along, there was a lot more plumbing, and you could play in a lot more keys. And the techniques had developed on the instrument. I mean, even something like the posthumous Weber theme and variations, it's very different to the theme and variations at the last movement of the Mozart Clarinet Quintet. Both great works, but the fact that one of them really requires a lot more finger busting than the other is because the instrument themselves allowed you to do more finger busting. And the Mozart second movement of the concerto is one of the most sublime pieces ever. And similarly, the second movement of the clarinet quintet.
Mm.
But that's brought about by the fact that first you've got somebody who could write opera and who could write for voice better than just about anybody. He could write a tune like nobody's business. So that second movement's in there. But the fact is, it's a kind of a respite from the technical demands that he has to find, which are limited in the instrument of his time. Even with somebody as great as Stadler, who was his clarinetist, who premiered those works. Weber's, quite a young composer when he died. He's only 40. And his works, from 50 years later, 30, 40, 50 years later. So goodness knows what Weber could have done if he lived another 20 or 30 years with the clarinet. So the difficulty is, as I say, it's a wobbly concept. I think there are lots of things that affect the concept of difficulty. And I haven't even talked about the talent of players and just how some players will take the hardest piece they can find and play it just because they can.
There is a clarinet piece by Stravinsky's, the what is it? The three pieces.
The solo piece.
Yeah, I remember. Yep. I was able to master the first movement, but when you get to the second and third, it just had this very, very difficult fingering going on, and all these melody. It's a lot of work, and Malcolm Arnold too is a nightmare to play.
That one I haven't played. My clarinet career didn't happen to Malcolm Arnold. It stopped with the Gershwin when I had an accident. The Gershwin is not a difficult. Not Gershwin. I do beg your pardon. Copeland. Sorry, I had a mind meld there. Copeland Concerto was the last piece I worked on, and it's also a difficult work because of not because of its fingering necessarily, but because of the rhythmic vitality that's necessary. And I know the Stravinsky very well. The Stravinsky is very difficult. And you're right in saying the second movement is just leaps and bounds ahead of the first. But because of the leaps, actual physical leaps between the pitches, and the rhythmic complexity, these are all things that for some people are much easier. They're much easier to get your mind around. So, as I say, difficulty is pretty wobbly.
There'd be some days I'd be able to play it, and then some days I'd just muck it up, And the third movement too was a struggle.
Well, that's how some days I'm great, some days I'm awful. Is every musician's nightmare, You turn up to your lesson with your teacher and you're playing. I don't know if you ever played the Shilovsky Sonatina.
Not yet.
For clarinet, solo work by a Polish composer from about the 40s. It's got some really finger-busting, chop-busting bits in the middle. And you'd spend, you do all the normal things you'd normally do. Start in little cells and then you'd make them bigger and you'd practice those over and over again until eventually you get the whole thing. You go, oh, great, I can play it. The night before the lesson, and the lesson you'd go to that point, it sounded like you picked the instrument up for the first time in a month, if ever. And your teacher would look at you, practice this incessantly. 2 days later, you come back to it, and it's perfect. And that's just the way I think we learn as humans. The way we sometimes need time to have things go into our brain. I mean. Listening to people like Rachel Rudick, who performed a lot of Brian Ferneyhough's music, particularly Cassandra's Dream Song and some other solo flute music, she would practice like crazy, and her method was to get up there and actually get in front of the composer and then say, "Take this," and bam. And Ferneyhough said that was perfect. Now play it faster. Because his idea was he didn't want it played perfectly. He wanted the struggle. He wanted that kind of tension. And I think she eventually, along with a couple of others, said, "That's it. I don't need that in my life either." But that's another aesthetic toward difficulty. The difficulty is not just something that's within your own fingers. It's within your your attitude to life. And you can, if you're doing something that's difficult, you're going to produce a different result and a different level of tension in your life than doing something you've been doing every morning for the past 30 years. Making yourself a cup of coffee is not as difficult as the first time you go rock climbing. But if you go rock climbing often enough, it'll be no harder than making yourself a cup of coffee.
Oh, exactly. It's all muscle memory. You know,
there's a lot of muscle memory, a lot of brain memory too. I mean, your brain and your muscles are so tightly. I don't know an awful lot about physiology, but the brain does. You don't see the music as it goes by. If you're memorizing it, for example, you know how it feels. And I don't know if that's. I don't know which part of the brain that deals with.
Were you taught to play music from memory or sight read? Because when I was in my undergrad, I would play sight reading all the time. Didn't have time to memorize it.
It depends. It depends on the work. And you always sight read. My teacher had a nice compromise in areas that were difficult. I mentioned the Shilovsky Sonatina before. There's a large section of it which is just the same patterns, but it's repeated very quickly. And her idea was that you memorize that bit. And you memorize the bits that are really hard. Eventually, I think if you've been playing a piece long enough, from memory, you end up playing it from memory. I've conducted a lot from memory without meaning to. I'd look down and I was 30 pages ahead. Oh, goodness me. Because I just got so into the music. I wasn't looking at the music anymore. That's very difficult to do with a new work. But it's in stuff that's your standard repertoire. I think it's perfectly legit, even as wind players that we were, or I was. But of course, sight reading is such a tradition amongst wind and brass and string players, because they're part of orchestras and they're churning music out all the time. They've got to have those reading chops. They've got to be able to read. And I think with our instant gratification society, we need people who are sight readers who can say, hey, sit down and play that for me, would you? And not wanting to deride or denigrate, I should say, pianists, but pianists aren't always the best sight readers in the world. And accompanists will actually not sight read a lot. They'll go in woodshed for a bit and prepare and come back. I think the tradition of sight reading and memory it varies, but it's fairly traditional. For example, now especially with standard repertoire and for wind and brass and violinists and so on, to play concertos from memory, especially standard concertos. I think the greatest honor one could ever have as a living composer would be if someone came up to play one of your pieces from memory. And it's only happened to me once. But it's still an extraordinary feeling that someone's put that much effort and time into your work and played it from memory. I mean, it's a big enough thrill when they play it when it's written out, and they sight read it or they read it. They shouldn't be sight reading, but they read it and they play it well. But when they do it from memory, it's an incredible thank you.
When you're writing a concerto, do you get it commissioned or do you charge a one-off fee to do it? Because I've never written a concerto, Houston.
It depends. I mean, sometimes the fee is the recording and all the trappings that come with it, and I think it's all part of like difficulty. It's all negotiable. You get certain composers who'll say, I only charge this amount of money per minute. And if there's a commission involved, and that's what I'll use as the standard, $500 a minute. It really does depend on also the capacity of people to pay. When you say to somebody, $3,000 to write this piece, they balk. or $30,000 if it's an opera or whatever it is. They balk because that's an awful lot of money. But then you try to explain to them that's 4 months of my living. A third of my year is gone to writing this piece full time. What do I do instead? If you're fortunate enough to do other things and have a teaching position or manage some sort of musical administrative position, as I've been an academic for 30 years, you have a steady income and you can be more flexible with what you charge and so on. Now that I'm mostly retired from that, I enter into these sorts of deals a little bit more warily. The next one is for a YouTube advertising campaign, and that's paid, and that has to be a particular standard of payment. So sometimes you don't have any flexibility to say, I'll charge you this. Sometimes it's this is the rate that's going.
Yeah.
So it really, for me, I've always been happy to be flexible.
Yeah, I remember we spoke a couple of months ago about Hans Zimmer. Yeah, he can charge 50 grand to write something for the film company.
I don't think he'd be charging that little. I think he'd be an awful lot more.
More? Jesus Christ.
Oh, yes. Because the way film can often work is that a huge amount of money is given to somebody, let's say $1 million to write a film score. But out of that has to happen, all the musicians who work on it need to be paid. All the studio recording fees need to be paid. So the composer at the end there could be instrumentalists involved, there could be arrangers, conductors involved. All the composers at the end will receive is what they haven't spent. But I think if Hans Zimmer was only making $50,000 from every movie, I doubt very much he'd be all that happy. I think he's making a heck of a lot more. And good luck to him, as far as I'm concerned, because he's prolific and he writes music that is suitable. Whether you want to go down that track as a film composer or not, it's entirely up to you. The money may be good, but the managerial experience is important. But also, you need to shelve a little bit of your own ego at times, because you're writing to a request, not just a commission. You're writing to a kind of, I suppose, so this music has to sound like this, or this music has to be remind me of this, and you receive what are called and when they're not called demos. No, they're a kind of a rush version of an example. Let's say the composer wants something that sounds like Dvorak, as they often do, and they'll give you a piece of Dvorak, make your piece sound like this. So there's not a lot of originality in a lot of modern film scores, because the director has already got the idea that they want this sort of music. Temp track is the word I'm looking for, and they'll give you the rush, the film with the temp track, and you say write music that sounds like that against it. And
speaking about the temp track, Houston, I've heard of composers writing, say, I don't know, 50 hours of music, and then it was just cut to 5 minutes because the director decided he wanted to put the temp track in. But at the end of the day, isn't the composer still getting paid his fee?
I'm assuming he or she is still getting paid.
You'd have to.
I think the film, one of the famous films, I think Pulp Fiction, is that the director was so enamored of the score he couldn't improve on it, so he used the old pieces. But I'd imagine there'd be time. Yeah, you're paid for the time that you spend working on the piece.
It was
2000, unless you've got a really hot shot.
2001 Space Odyssey with Alex North, and all his music got cut from the movie, and he showed up to the premiere as well. It must have been very awkward, that.
Well, that happens to actors as well.
Wow.
And it happens to actors. I've got a friend who's just posted on Facebook every scene she just did for a new something or other that was being broadcast or released, a new film being released now. Every scene, every word that she did has been cut.
Oh dear.
She's not in the film at all. I had a small amount of work in a Bollywood movie that it overran its time, and the scene I was in was cut. I still got paid.
Yeah.
I still got paid, but it doesn't do an awful lot for your professional reputation.
There's not much you can do, I guess.
There's nothing. It's not your. That's the thing you take on when you take on film. You take on everybody else's wishes rather than your own. And if you want to have 100%, the 100% Stephen channel, the 100% Houston channel, you just do it yourself.
Now, with film composers, say they wrote all that music and it's got cut, do you still own it or not, or is it the film?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. That's still your music. I mean, no one's using it,
and can you
unless there's something in your contract that says otherwise.
And can you put it on like Spotify and publish it?
Oh, that's something that you'd have to talk to a legal person. But as far as I'm concerned, if you own the copyright, you could put it on Spotify, I'm sure. But that would depend entirely on what your contract is.
Because you don't see a lot of composers; they don't publish unreleased works a lot of the time. I think they should do that, like publish works that weren't made into the film, be able to perform that.
I imagine so, but they might be hanging. It might be on. We've all got a bottom drawer with spare music in it, and when a chance for a quick turnaround happens, you just I may have something here, and you just here, try this. A composer who shall remain nameless, because it wasn't me, but was in a concert that I had a piece done in. It was all about Hans Christian Andersen, and I wrote a brand new piece for this concert called "With Eyes as Big." It was a way of telling the story about the soldier coming back from the war, and he meets three dogs with eyes as big as, I think, saucers, with eyes as big as dinner plates, with eyes as big as windmills. So each one was a kind of a portrait of the dog in sound. One of the other composers had a piece performed called The Little Mermaid Dances, or The Mermaid's Waltz, and it was a waltz. And it was from drew a little too heavily on the Disney version of the film, I think. But because in the Hans Christian Andersen, she actually has an extremely painful time dancing, because she's dancing on the end of her little fish legs. But it was just a pretty waltz. And it was called The Mermaid Dances or something like that. And I caught a look at the music, because it wasn't done on Finale or Sibelius. It was actually handwritten. And there was another title on every page that had been scrubbed out that had something to do with Vienna. And the new title put in. So he'd just taken a waltz, grabbed the piece, scrubbed the title out, put the new title on. There you go. There's the piece in the bottom drawer. And we've all done that. We've all got that. Maybe not as a complete piece, but ideas and bits that you can develop into other things.
That's amazing. Yeah, as far as being a composer, have you ever been in Hollywood?
The closest I've ever got was the University of Southern California Film Music School, where I went to visit one of my students who got a scholarship there. But no, I've never done anything to do with Hollywood. I doubt if I would. I've been in LA a few times. I have a few actor friends, but the film music is not something that attracts my interest, perhaps because my ego is too large. But it's not that I don't collaborate well. I don't want to collaborate with people. I just don't want to lose my identity. I think, the music that John Williams, for example, writes as John Williams, the composer, versus John Williams, the film composer, they used to be poles apart, and now they're very, very similar. And I think there are certain things I wouldn't want to lose, and that would be my musical identity. And I think I would lose that if I was heavily involved in that kind of film.
Well, talk about Hans Zimmer. He's playing very simple stuff. I mean, it's not very hard to play. I don't think he's a trained classical musician, but yet he's got a lot
I
of
don't
talent.
remember. I know he started life as a keyboard player in a band called the Monitors, and they had a big hit called "Video Killed the Radio Star," and I think he was the keyboard player in that. He is a very good businessman. He knows what sells. He also surrounds himself with extremely fine players, and that's a good talent to be able to find talent. I have a friend who's his cellist, and a lot of that is there's action, there's drama, there's a lot of atmosphere in the music he writes. And like most film composers, someone else can do some of the arrangements with him. He doesn't do all the orchestration, but I think I wouldn't put him down too much for being as successful as he is. He's even managed to get onto one of these online education courses where you can actually learn about film music composition from him. It's expensive, but it's something that he clearly knows a lot about, and he uses his knowledge. And good luck to him. I think it's life is a little bit too short to worry about somebody else's success compared to your own. You only need to think about what success means to you. And if success is having for your fellow musicians appreciate what you do, come to play for you and play your music without being begged, and that music goes over the way you want it to, that's really all I want. The rebound from the audience is less important, except for the fact that very often if you get all of that stuff that I just mentioned right, the rebound from the audience, no matter how the music sounds to the ear, no matter how unfamiliar it is, it's usually fairly positive. They pick up on, an audience will pick up on joyful music making, and that could mean anything, but they will pick up on the fact that the music that they are hearing is a joy to make, no matter how difficult it sounds, no matter how dissonant it might be, no matter what. The people up there making music that maybe they don't understand, and an audience will pick up on that and celebrate it.
And what inspires you to write a concerto? Because they take a long time.
A concerto is usually, if the word is inspired is correct, it's usually a response to a great player, somebody I want to write for. So the Viola Concerto was written for a guy called Brett Dubner, who's performed it a number of times and did that amazing recording. The tuba concerto is written for a guy called Alan Baer, who's the principal tuba of the New York Philharmonic. The Euphonium Concerto was written for Matt Van Emmerich, who's one of the best euphonium players in the world. The Piano Concerto was written in memory of Roger Frampton. That's one of the few that I haven't had a specific artist in mind for. Violin Concerto was written for Susan Collins, who's at Tassie Con. So I would say almost entirely it's to do with a person who plays in a fabulous way, and you want to be part of that. There was a lot of talk going around last week after that young woman who recited the poem at Biden's inauguration, and someone that I've in my circle of Twitter friends said, gosh, we're all going to be lining up wanting to set her words now. And that's true. You as a composer, you see someone or you hear someone who is superb at what they do, and you think, I want to be part of that. I want to be with them. I want to make music with them. I want to make my art with them, because it's such a joy to collaborate with people like that.
Mm.
So for
Yeah.
me, it's the concerto idea when I do write a concerto, and I mean, I write many more things other than concerto, but every concerto has been for a specific person.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And most of the other work that I do is for a specific person too.
Mm-hmm.
I must say that. I have particular people who will play my music because they like it, or because they like me, or something. And so therefore that tends to allow certain instruments to stand out in my repertoire of pieces. And the piano, flute, clarinet, orchestra. That's the sort of that's the people I know and love, and that they're the ones who want to play my music.
Mm.
There's no French horn concerto there because no French horn players ever come up to me and said, "I think you're really cool. Write me a piece." So that's a few trumpet players have, but that's fine.
Mm. No, that's amazing. And yeah, no, it's great to do that. How long do your concertos go for?
Oh, again, that's how long is a piece of string?
Mm.
How long does a piece need to go for?
A lot of concertos are like an hour long, 3 movements usually.
An hour-long concerto would probably be very difficult to perform because I think you'd be exhausted.
Mm.
My viola concerto is about 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The tuba concerto is 21.
Mm-hmm.
That's the longest. The Euphonium Concerto, I couldn't tell you how long it's going to be. The first movement was 6.5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably going to be between 15 and 20 minutes. That, I think, is an ideal length for something like that, because you're asking somebody to put a huge amount of work in for every minute. I mean, big pieces like the Busoni Piano Concerto, which in 5 movements and it lasts for 45 minutes, they are the rare ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that very few people will actually perform them. You've got to strike a balance between what you think if you get the piece in the air at all, and it's hard enough to get a piece. It's hard enough to get a piece with 3 notes in it in the air as it is to 3,000. If you're going to try and get it in the air and playing at all, then you need to make sure that is possible. If getting something performed is important to you, then you must remove barriers to make sure that it gets performed. And one of the barriers is you need a 10-minute piece. Hey, I've written a 25-minute piece for you. There you go. It's more than you wanted. But I've only got 10 minutes on the program. So a concerto lasting between 10 and 20 minutes is ideal in a 3-piece program, because they're wanting to hear a short orchestral work to begin with, maybe a Haydn symphony that might be 25 minutes. Then your concerto, which is 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes in the lounge at the front having a drink, and then a 40-minute big work at the end. And that's a good night. That's a big night. Most concerts are now looking at no more than 90 minutes of music for a concert. I mean, I say that because I'm a conductor as well, and if I ask somebody, I say, look, I really need it to be this length of time if you're writing me a new work. And if they write me something that's really large, I can't do it because I've got commitments to all these others. And I think as a composer, you should be able to have the discipline to say what you need to say within a particular amount of time. If you want to write a novel, but all you're given is a Twitter post, then you write the Twitter post and you get to say what the novel says in the Twitter, in the tweet, I should say. There's a lot of self-discipline involved.
I wanted to talk about social media and music these days. We got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. What do you prefer most? Because I know you're on Twitter. I've got it as well. How do you find Twitter?
Yep. I found it a very good way to digest a lot of material very quickly. If you're looking for deep analysis, you're not going to get it on Twitter. But you are going to get the points that people are trying to make. And I'm not one who censors people who make opposite points to me or who believe in different things to me. I think that's wrong. I think I need to know what other people think. I will censor them and cut them out if they are rude and vile. But that's if they've got ideas that are contrary to mine, I won't cut them for that. I'll still listen. So I do like Twitter for that reason. But if you're wanting deep analysis, there's plenty of other ways of doing that. Going on to just reading online journals and contributing to online forums and so on. Facebook and so on is, I've always thought, was good for two things. One is catching up with people, and the other was getting work. My first Viola Concerto came about from a Facebook friendship. It's the most incredible piece of Facebook I've ever done. Facebook, I should say. And I think every one of them has a has a use and therefore a weakness. I tend to look at Instagram as a way of documenting things that maybe take a lot more words than I have, or even may take words that I cannot summon. And I don't use it very often. And it's generally to announce things or to let things be out there in the public that I don't need to then talk on. If somebody wants to talk about it, they can start that chat conversation privately. But Facebook is a good way of going into a longer discourse, and in that way it provides, I think for me, it provides a combination of discourse and video that I'm quite happy with. I don't think I need to do more than those three. I don't have time. I've got to write music.
Well, what I found with my company, Shiels Productions, focusing on Instagram and Facebook for music, I think it's better. I've got the Twitter page, but don't get enough traffic with Twitter. Do you find you get a lot of traffic on your Twitter?
I get enough. Twitter for me is not so much and I use it for a certain specific. I use it as a place not to talk about my professional life, but to talk about the things I believe in. So therefore, I'll sit there and sometimes I'll say a particular thing, and over the next 5 minutes, 20 people will go, yeah, and then one person will go, yeah, and that person will think, well, why did you do that? And I'll engage with that person, and then they'll insult you, and then you cut them. But once they start to insult you, but you block them, I should say. But no, I get a fair bit of. I've got two Facebook pages. One is a personal one, and there's a professional. I call them the personal and the professional, and they meld. And Instagram is a kind of a where everything else fits that doesn't fit in those two. And I don't really worry too much about traffic, to be honest, because I've also got a website. And what I really need is a social media person who could keep up with all of that, because I found if I was doing my social media accounts with the kind of detail and that they needed, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. I wouldn't actually be able to create any content. And to me, the most important thing is writing music, is performing, whether I'm performing as an artist, or as a musician, or as an actor, or as a singer. Those are the most important things to me, and they'll always be more important than social media. As somebody once said to me, the performance is always more important than the documentation of the performance. And the only comeback to that is unless the documentation is being used for a grants application. But very often it's not. The performance is the thing.
That's
always about that. That's the sacred right. The recording of it is not.
Do you find word of mouth is always better?
I think it's an old cliche that word of mouth is the best, but I think it's still true. Word of mouth is becoming less less common. I think people will take their word of mouth and they'll stick it on their Twitter feed, or they'll put it on their Facebook feed. So I think there's a certain, I mean, there are other things that you find out on these that you don't realize have happened, such as tonight. I'd forgotten all about a particular thing that's happening in South Melbourne that I'm going to go see tonight. But the only reason I remembered it was because somebody put it up on Facebook this morning. But, oh, yeah, right. I've got to go to that.
Now, you're in Melbourne. You went into the stage 4 lockdown, and I'm in Sydney. You had to wear masks all the time. And
yes.
It was $1,000 fine. They brought in a restriction here. You have to wear a mask in the shop. If you don't, it's a $200 fine in Sydney.
That's been lifted today, by the way.
Oh.
That's been, yep.
Now, when
today, your premier lifted it today.
When you went into stage 4 lockdown, how did you cope being in the second lockdown?
Oh, the second lockdown, it was lockdown for me because in this part of Melbourne, we started actually quite early. We were in March. We had an early lockdown, selected postcodes. There was only about 2 weeks off in the middle. And I emerged from those 2 weeks into the Melbourne traffic and went, oh, I much preferred lockdown. But lockdown for me, I took up a lot of online teaching. I happened to live right near the Maribyrnong River, so there's a lot of pleasant walks, and so on. But there were other things that were less pleasant, such as being unable to see people, and I'm quite gregarious. But I sat down and wrote music. There's quite a bit of music. I wrote a series of songs for a mezzo soprano called Sally Ann Russell, and they're called "Songs My Lockdown Taught Me." So there was quite a bit of music created during that time, and that was probably the way I'd survived probably best. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of preparation for another little project that finally happened around November, where I was starting to emerge and starting up a career as a stand-up comic.
Nice.
And so that's in fact where I'm going to go hear some people tonight. So that's the kind of thing that that I've been looking to do, is finding new ways to express myself.
Yeah, it's how's restrictions in Melbourne? Is it slowly getting back to normal?
Oh, it's actually fairly good. We still have our masks in shops and so on, but it's pretty much, there's very little in the way of the draconian restrictions, and I use that term advisedly, that were happening. Downtown Melbourne is a little quiet because not a lot of people have actually returned to their office work yet, but a lot of people are actually still working. They're working from home. And it's actually, I think this particular experience for all of us will be such that we realize we don't actually need to turn up to the office all that often. Maybe we should be working from home. As long as stuff gets done, why not? What's going to happen to all that vacant office space? Well, there's an instant solve to the homeless problem. There's something I think really good needs to come out of all of this, and what we do as people and the way we organize ourselves as people is one of those things. Things are still getting built. There's a construction site all around me here as they're building all these new apartments. Things are still happening. And just pop a mask on, everything's fine. Shops are open, restaurants are open. You can't stand shoulder to shoulder and elbow to elbow in them, but you can be part of the experience of dining and going out. And just be careful. And we've been very careful here in Victoria. We've had a lot of non-infectious days, and I think I'd much rather be around and see my friends around and healthy than see them once and they have to go to their funerals.
Have you known anyone who had COVID-19?
Yes.
And what did they say about it? Is it bad or is it?
It's varied. One or two have died.
Yep.
Others have said it's the worst thing they've ever had and lived. And these are young, not necessarily older people. I was just in touch with a friend in Colorado who said she had it. And she said it was probably the worst thing she's ever had. She'd been in her early 30s.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So now the thing about our particularly strict lockdown here in Victoria, once it got going, not a lot of people actually caught it. And that left a real rift. People say, oh, well, nobody's catching it. Why do we have these lockdowns? Well, actually, you can also look at it the other way, which is that we're having these lockdowns. That's why nobody's actually catching it. That's why the cases went down, and you can't let your foot off the accelerator when you're running away from trouble.
I've heard,
and so people were benefiting from the lockdowns. That's for sure.
The COVID-19, you can have it and have no symptoms, which is
that's correct.
Weird.
I believe so. Yeah,
and
which is why testing was so important.
Adults have picked it up from little babies who just have a slight runny nose. That's weird.
Yeah. Well, I don't know above and beyond anecdotal evidence about that. I'm not a frontline health worker. What I see is frontline health workers in particular, the ones because I've got a lot of family in Britain, and seeing them just collapse with emotional exhaustion as well as everything else means that the people who are denying that it exists and who are denying the efficacy of what's going on, they deserve a couple of hours on the front lines. And masked up and vaccinated maybe, but they need to see what's going on.
Well, speaking about a vaccine, hoping to get one in March this year.
Yes, I believe actually I heard February recently. So,
but see, there's two, isn't there? A Pfizer vaccine and AstraZeneca. Would you be skeptical about taking a vaccine straight away, or would you wait till they improve it?
Well, I don't know what you mean by improve it. If it's pretty much 100%, it's pretty much improved.
That's just my opinion.
I'm a type 1 insulin dependent diabetic, which means I'm in a high risk group, and I would be fairly early on, I'd imagine, being offered it, and I would say yes. Partly because not so much from self-preservation, but if it stops me from passing it on to somebody, then sign me up. I think it's just as important that not only are you prepared and you're preserved, but you stop other people from being sick. I mean, that's the reason for masks. The mask is not there just to keep you safe, but it's there to reduce the risk you have of passing it on to someone else. And if you're both wearing masks, and now I believe the Dr. Fauci in America, the head of infectious diseases, his task force is now calling for double masking, put 2 masks on. And that makes more sense. It makes perfectly good sense. And it's not just you that's out there. It's all of your family. It's all everybody else's family. It's the rest of society. And we're all in danger. And, we need to learn that we're all in this together.
The reason why I say that, Houston, because vaccines usually take 3 to 4 years to develop properly. Now they're trying to push one out in about a year as well, and you got to be careful of side effects too.
I'm not an expert, so I won't comment. Because there have been a lot of tests run on this. The FDA, FDA in America and the Therapeutic Good TGA here in Australia have all tested it. And, we go with these people for everything else. So why not this one?
Mm-hmm.
This was a major important initiative. And I think most people are saying, why are we waiting so long until February before we get it? No, I'm not an expert, so I can't comment.
No, that's fair enough.
That sort of stuff.
But I don't know how they're going to vaccinate everyone. Are they going to send a letter in the mail, or are they going to make it mandatory? That's
no, I don't think they can make it mandatory, and I don't know really. The thing that I would imagine is you'd do it through your GP, and other people. Somebody joked they should give all the training to Amazon delivery drivers, so that when they turn up, they can give you a vaccine, because they're everywhere. But no, I'd be looking through my GP to find out about that. My GP is very good.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Well, let's hope that it all covers us all, and that we get to the point where we can push this one aside and on to the next one.
Yeah, because there will be another pandemic again.
Oh, that's no doubt. Yes,
I think there was a professor a couple years ago was talking about I don't know, I forgot, did a lecture, and he said we're gonna have another pandemic sooner or later.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Barack Obama, who said the same thing. And that's why he set up the pandemic task force. Yeah, and it'll happen. I mean, you look at human history, and there's been diseases that sweep through that we've never encountered before. Whether my parents were victims of the diphtheria epidemic in the 30s and 40s in the UK. I was a victim of the mumps, measles, rubella plague that happened in Europe in the early 60s. I got all of them, and they've left me with weak eyes and things that you don't expect. A lot of kids died because of it. So there's always the Spanish flu in the 1980s, more dramatically, even killed more people than who died in World War One. Everything back to the Black Death and beyond. Black Death was 1348. So going back even further than that, there have been massive maladies that have swept through human society. And it's going to keep happening. And that's why we have to trust and invest in our medical system and our medical practitioners, because they are the only ones who can be counted on to help us out. We need to pay them more.
Just hope the vaccine will work. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I can't. There's. I guess we'll find out, but I can't imagine why it wouldn't.
Houston, fantastic show with you today.
Nice to talk to you.
Where can people find you on your social media, website? Where are you?
Oh, it tends to be the same, really. It's just HoustonDunleavy.com is my website. And I'm in the same on Twitter, Instagram. It's just the same, just my name. There's no reason to hide behind anything fancy when you've already got a weird name. And that'll be on Instagram, Twitter, and my what's the other one? Facebook. So just do a search on my name.
Sweet.
That's easily found.